Welcome everyone. Today we will discuss what would have happened if the Arabs won the Great Siege of Constantinople. Now, as a bit of historical context, the Great Siege of Constantinople was a siege that lasted from 717 to 718 and is sometimes referred to as one of the most important sieges in history. This was the last major attack of the Umayyad Caliphate on the Byzantine Empire. It was an attempt by the Umayyad Caliph Suleiman to increase his sinking popularity in the Caliphate by conquering Constantinople, the city of the world's desire and the seat of the Byzantine Empire. During the Arab-Roman Wars, the Arabs had managed to take most of Roman Asia and Africa, barring Anatolia. This would leave the Byzantines on the defensive against the massive Caliphate. The Arabs wanted this to be their final chance to conquer Rome once and for all. An Arab army led by the general Maslama and a fleet set sail to the Eternal City. Anatolia was raided and pacified, and the siege began. Constantinople was blockaded and the Arabs landed in Thrace and put the city under siege. Maslama had already made a deal with Leo the Isaurian to put him on the Byzantine throne against the unpopular Theodosius III. Leo succeeded but deceived the Arabs and didn't surrender. At the same time, mutinies had begun in the Arab navy by Christian Egyptians who proceeded to give the Byzantines valuable information. The Byzantines used this information and engaged the Arab fleet in battle, burning them with Greek fire and lifting the blockade, while the Arab army had now lost their supply chain and soon faced a force led by Leo III and the Bulgarian Khan Tervel to defeat the Arabs, ending the siege. This is remembered as one of the most decisive victories in Byzantine history, and this greatly damaged the Umayyad Caliphate. But what if this never happened? Today we will answer that question, but before starting the scenario, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel, as it would help me create more alternate history scenarios just like this. I have also created a schedule for my videos, so keep that in mind. But without any further ado, let's start the scenario. Our point of divergence would be when the Christian Egyptians start mutinies, which we would have the Arabs manage to put down. This would allow them to retain naval superiority, and once a ship is burned by the Byzantines, another takes its place. This would allow them to continue the siege on land. We will also have Khan Tervel not help the Byzantines and instead have him take the Byzantine land in the Balkans due to the Byzantines already being preoccupied. This would lead into the siege dragging well into 719 AD. The Arabs would send another army, this time into Anatolia, to put the city in a siege from the Bosphorus as well. The Byzantines would hold on for a few years, but by 720 it would be too much. Constantinople would be going through a famine due to the blockade, and no help would come. This would lead to the starving peasants rioting, which the tired and starved guards would have to control. Arab spies used this opportunity and opened the gates, and the city falls, with most people not even resisting. Leo III would escape into the Black Sea and try to continue his empire in Crimea. Constantinople would fall, and with it, the Byzantine Empire would end. This victory would be extremely costly for the Umayyads and would accelerate their downfall. The Umayyads would annex Anatolia, Constantinople, Thrace, and eventually Athens, Thessaloniki, and the Aegean Islands, while Byzantine Italy would fall to the Lombards. The Byzantine islands across the Mediterranean would declare independence, but some would be seized by the Arabs later on. The Byzantine Empire would continue in Crimea for a few years, but would eventually get conquered by the Khazars, finally ending the Byzantine Empire. In the late 720s, most of the Byzantine nobility would convert to Islam, but with not much Arab influence, they'd retain their own writing script and most parts of their culture. Peasants would remain Christian for now, but would slowly convert to this new religion to pay less taxes. Entering the 730s, the Umayyads would send a large army into the Balkans to subjugate it. The Bulgars would be the first would get defeated, and taking advantage of this, the Avars would take Dacia from them. After the Bulgars, the Arabs would defeat most of the Slavs and Byzantine remnants, only being stopped at Croatia by the Lombards and Avars. Some of these groups would start converting, but like in our timeline with the Byzantines, it would be slow. While most of the Balkan territory would get heavily raided by the Avars and the Lombards. By 741, the Abbasid revolution would start, resulting in the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate. Taking advantage of this, regional governors in faraway provinces like Morocco would declare independence, while Cordoba breaks away like in our timeline. The governors in Greece would also declare independence, but would still acknowledge the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad as the rightful caliphs. This new Greek emirate would be called the Emirate of Rome. Time would pass and Rome would slowly consolidate itself, but by the late 790s, a new threat would emerge from the west. Charlemagne and his Frankish Empire would declare war on Rome and would defeat them. He would annex Croatia and later on Bosnia. In the year 800, Charlemagne would get crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope in Rome. Unlike our own timeline, this would be met with no controversy, as due to the fall of the Byzantine Empire, everyone would acknowledge Charlemagne, his successors, and the Frankish Empire as the rightful successors to Rome. The Romans would slowly consolidate their realm, while the Frankish Empire splits and decentralizes. In its aftermath, the Duchy of Croatia Slavonia emerges would be a pain for Rome and would limit Roman expansion westward. It looks like Rome is gaining the upper hand. The HRE would interfere to make sure Croatia remained, dragging out the Roman-Slavic wars. By the mid-800s, the Abbasids would start collapsing. Originally, Rome wouldn't do much, but would soon start expanding east. By the 900s, Rome would still be working on internal issues and would slowly see a revival termed as the Macedonian Renaissance. Roman art and culture would flourish, with Constantinople overtaking Baghdad as the world's largest city and slowly becoming the main center for the Islamic Golden Age. Alright, enough external stuff. Let's talk about how it would be like internally. On the religious side, the Greeks by this point would mostly adopt Sunni Islam, while the Bulgars would also convert to Islam. The Albanians would convert to Islam as well, while the South Slavs would be more religiously diverse. The Serbs would adopt Sunni Islam, while the Croats, like in our timeline, would adopt Catholicism. Bosnians would also accept Catholicism, but would also have large populations of Orthodox Christians. Hungary would also adopt Catholicism and would style itself as a defender of the cross against the Saracen threat in the powder keg of Europe. In Asia, it would be mostly the same. Armenia would remain Coptic, while Georgia, like Armenia, would preserve Orthodox Christianity, becoming the last Orthodox nation. On the linguistic side of things, the Greeks would keep their writing script, but it would be influenced by the Arabs' writing script, resulting in a few words changing. On the cultural side of things, Greek culture would become influenced by Islam, with many famous scientists and scholars coming from Rome during the Islamic Golden Age. Art from this age would be based upon ancient Greek mythology instead of the Abrahamic religions due to iconography in Islam. Entering the 1000s, Rome would experience a second Golden Age and would conquer Syria, Armenia, and the Caucasus. By this point, they would also fight the Seljuks, but would lose, and it would only be minor, and no Turkic migration into Anatolia would happen. The Roman Golden Age would persist, and they would refocus their efforts in the Balkans. As the HRE weakens and decentralizes, Rome would finally manage to defeat and annex Croatia, but this would have unwanted side effects, as the Crusades would start in this timeline, not with the aim of taking Jerusalem, but taking Constantinople instead. From across Europe, various lords and dukes would embark on this holy war for God, glory, and gold. The First Crusade as we know it would be altered. It would fail in its goal of capturing Constantinople, but would manage to create several Crusader states in the region, and even help places like Bulgaria and Serbia break away from Roman rule. One point I forgot to mention is the Kievan Rus. Here they would adopt Sunni Islam. My reasoning being is that in our timeline there were other factors in their conversion to Orthodoxy, one of which being that they would have a good relationship with Byzantium. Since Byzantium won't exist here, they'd adopt Sunni Islam instead to have a good relationship with Rome. But the states more in the north, like Novgorod, would adopt Catholicism instead, making Novgorod more culturally and religiously diverse and distant from the rest of the Rus. In the aftermath of the First Crusade, five Crusader states would be created in the region, these being the County of Athens, the Duchy of Achaia, the Duchy of Montenegro, the Knights Hospitality of Rhodes, and the strongest state, the Kingdom of Thessaloniki. The Republic of Venice would also rise in prominence, becoming the richest and strongest naval power in the Mediterranean. Rome would slowly recover and would have skirmishes with the Crusaders. In the 1100s, the Second Crusade would be launched with the aim to capture Constantinople. The Crusaders would come dangerously close, but would be stopped, with the Duchy of Montenegro being reconquered. In the following crusade, Thessaloniki would finally be reconquered, and the Crusades would lose their importance. But now we have entered the 1200s, and a new threat has emerged in the east. The Mongols, like in our timeline, would carve a path of blood through China, Persia, and Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. Reaching the Middle East, they would face Rome. Anatolia and the Balkans would get raided simultaneously by the Mongols. The Romans would use this to reconquer Serbia and Bulgaria, reintegrating them. Rome would eventually surrender and would agree to pay tribute to the Mongols. Later on, when the Mongols split up, Rome alongside Egypt would fight and defeat the Ilkhanate. In the following wars, Rome would finally annex the remaining Crusader states, ending the Crusades and leaving only Venice as a rival in the region. The 1300s would be spent fighting Venice to recover lost territory, while also dealing with internal problems. They would also help the Rus states against the Golden Horde, in doing so, reconquering Crimea and re-establishing Greek presence there. This would lead to Russia or a Rus state being formed by the early 1400s, excluding Novgorod, who by this point would have been a part of Scandinavia with their language, culture, and religion being different from the rest of the Rus. By the 1400s, the Romans would have recovered the land they lost pre First Crusade. An alternate Crusade of Nicopolis and later Crusade of Varna would have happened to contain Rome. Rome would survive these crusades and by the late 1400s would take Croatia Slavonia. But during this time, the Spanish and Portuguese have discovered the New World, and European powers race to this New World. What happens next? Do Rome and Russia establish colonies in the New World, or do they fall out of relevance and lose power to the rest of Europe? All this will be discussed in another day. This is where I'll end this scenario. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But for now, goodbye.